better move to the side of the road. What's the name again?
Platypus.
Uh-huh.
Platypus.
That's right.
Platypus.
Platypus Police Squad.
Hi everybody, my name is Jarrett Krosoczka, and I'm an author and I'm an illustrator. And here is my studio. I live and work in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is in the western part of the state. You might know me from some of my picture books like Baghead or Punk Farm, or you might know me from the Lunch Lady series. The latest book, which was just published last month, is called Lunch Lady and the Video Game Villain. But I'm here today to celebrate the release of my new chapter book, which is called Platypus Police Squad. And the first book in the series is called The Frog Who Croaked. The Platypus books are very different for me because they're chapter books. You know, there are probably more words in this one book than almost all of my books combined altogether. And it's my 20th book, so there are a lot of books that came before this one. And while there are a lot of illustrations in the book, it was a huge learning curve for me, a very big learning process for me, because I had to learn to really focus in on the words. So the story itself follows the chronicles of Detective Rick Zango, who's the hotshot young rookie, who's partnered with the old-timer, Corey O'Malley, who sort of lost his spark a little bit, but is still really good at his job. It's that Rick Zango can't really see that at first, and the two just, they don't see eye to eye, but they need to work together in order to keep their city safe. So I'm going to show you some pictures today, and I'm going to talk to you about the process I took to write these books, and then I'm also going to give you a little drawing lesson. And so I'm going to start with the question that I'm asked a lot over the years. And that is that people would ask, what's the difference between writing picture books and writing graphic novels? And for me, what I would always say is kind of like comparing red apples to green apples. Because both a picture book and a graphic novel relies on the words and pictures to work equally hand in hand to tell the story. It's that one story is a lot longer, and because my Lunch Lady books have a limited palette, with my picture books I have to worry about the color palette and the color theory, and the Lunch Lady books are black and yellow. So there are a lot of decisions I don't have to make because they're limited color. But now I've written a chapter book. So I would say a chapter book is like a pineapple. It's like this whole complete other thing where, you know, I was thinking too visually. When I started writing this book, I was thinking way too visually. And it was my editor, Jordan Brown, who really had to pull me back and say, you know, with a chapter book, let's focus on the words, let's focus on the text and the manuscript. And then once that's all written, we'll go in and we'll talk about what we can illustrate and how those illustrations can enhance the story. But the illustrations don't carry the story like the illustrations will carry a story in a picture book and a graphic novel. So why Platypus Police Squad? Well, what happened was the year before Punk Farm was published, I would visit schools and I would draw a picture of the pig with the aviator sunglasses, or the cow with the aviator sunglasses, or the sheep with the aviator sunglasses, but I wouldn't draw their instruments, and I would ask the students to guess what they thought my next book was going to be about. And one kid was incorrect when he guessed, this is a book about farm animals that are cops. And I said, no, you know, it's not a book about farm animals that are cops, but it stuck in my head. And I like the thought of there being a book about animal cops. So I went home and I started writing a book called Penguin Police Squad, about two penguins, Rick Zango and Officer Corey O'Malley, the hotshot young rookie partnered with the old-timer. And I filled sketchbooks with penguins. But then something happened. Penguins were everywhere. There were penguin movies, penguin documentaries, penguin cartoon movies where the penguins tap danced. Then there were TV shows based on the movie Penguins. Then there were video games online that starred penguins. And penguins were just everywhere. And I knew that if I wanted my story to stick out, I would need to find another animal. But I always loved the way penguin police sounded. That's called alliteration, where two words start with the same sound. So I began searching for another animal that would start with the P sound, and I came to the platypus. And I began to write a book called Platypus Police Squad about two police officers who were very different and needed to learn to work together. So I do a lot of preconceptual work before I start writing the actual plot of the book. This is a document that I put together to share with my publisher to see if they'd like to pick it up. And I figured out, okay, what is the book set up? What is the synopsis of the story? What is the tone of the book? What is this fictional world that I'm creating? Because even though this is a world that's inhabited by platypuses who are cops, I still need to figure out what the rules are. I create the own rules for this world, and I need to live by them. And then I figure out what is going to happen in the story. So then I start thinking of, okay, the synopsis. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 of the story. And these are just highlights of that document. The document was probably around maybe 30, 35 pages or so. And I had to do some research. I do research for all of my books. When I was writing Punk Farm, I went to petting zoos and I went to concerts. I took photographs of the farm animals. I took photographs of the lights they would use to color the stage, to light the stage. And that all inspired Punk Farm and what became the books. Same thing with Lunch Lady. When I was writing Lunch Lady, as I would visit schools, I would stop by the cafeteria and I would say hello to the cafeteria staff. And I'd get to know them. They'd let me photograph their equipment. So when it came time to writing Platypus, I watched documentaries about platypuses. And I called my local police station and I got to know the cops there. I did what's called a ride-along. So from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I got to sit in the front seat of a cop car while Officer Sean went about his duties as a cop. And it was a quiet night. I was thinking maybe we'd see some action. Maybe I'd get to kick down a door or something like that. Of course, I was told at the very beginning I was not to leave the car under any circumstances. But it was a quiet night. We got to pull over a few people. So it was fun to ride really fast in a cop car, and have the sirens going. But nothing too exciting, which was actually to my favor. I benefited greatly from that. Because it was so quiet, I was able to ask Officer Sean a lot of questions. Why did you want to become a cop? What are some crazy things that you've seen? And because I asked really good questions, I learned a lot. And I learned things that I would have never have been able to learn by searching on Google or looking up on Wikipedia. And so talking to Officer Sean really helped me get a handle of the motivations for some of my characters, and especially talking about what happens when you're partnered with someone who you don't really see eye to eye with. And especially if it's a young person and a person who's been around the block, not only are you going to behave differently, but of course you're going to also dress differently. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit when I draw the characters for you. So I got to writing the story, and draft after draft after draft I wrote. And so after my very first draft, I was really proud. I wrote a few hundred pages, and my editor wrote me back a letter explaining what was wrong with it. So here are the first 2 pages of his letter. Here are the next 3 pages of his letter, and here are the remaining pages of his letter to me on what just was not working with my first draft. So I was a little disheartened at first because I was really, 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 really excited about the draft. I felt really accomplished, but just because I wrote it once, A, didn't mean it was any good, and B, it certainly didn't mean that I was finished. Because when you write that first draft, that's just only the beginning, because you have to write and rewrite and rewrite. And sometimes when you rewrite, you need to throw away 95% of what you've written. But that's okay, because you had to get that bad draft out of your system. And when you write these drafts, and even if you don't use pieces of what you wrote, you still learn about the characters. You learn about what they like. You learn about how they're going to react to things. So we decided that we would write the books in third person with a limited knowledge of what was going on in the characters' heads. So, my first draft, I was really getting into both characters' heads and what they were thinking, but we decided that it would be best to only get to know what Rick Zango is thinking and learning, because since he's new to this world, we are new to the world as well, so he's going to have points of views that will help us understand what's going on and help us be introduced to the story. Now, I decided to write the book in past tense, but every one of these books is going to start with a prologue where some kind of crime happens, and I wanted that to feel really immediate and really dangerous. And so that's why the prologue is told in first person, but then we switch to third person when we get to the story. So I made draft after draft after draft after draft, and the biggest thing that I learned in this process is to show and not to tell. So what that means, instead of just writing Rick Zango was sad, I would write Rick Zango walked into the house, he slowly opened the door, he slung his head down, he let his jacket fall to the floor, and he slumped in the couch. So I give context clues to help you learn about how the character feels, the way they're feeling. So again, just draft after draft after draft, rewriting and rewriting, getting notes back and forth from my editor and my publisher. But eventually, we came to a draft that was pretty much finished. It was, it needed some polishing still, but it was just about done. And so what happens is then the designer at the publisher, they take my text and they plug it into a template. They break it down, they take this Word document that I wrote and break it down into how it's going to be all laid out in the chapters. And so I would go through that and I would make little notes, little sketches on what I wanted to see. And I decided that I would open every chapter with a big illustration because I always loved, as a kid, I loved being rewarded by getting to the next chapter by seeing a big, exciting illustration. So this tiny little sketch would eventually become this big sketch. And I do all of my sketching on my iPad now. So I do a lot of traveling around, and I found it more convenient to sketch the illustrations on my iPad. I might do this from a hotel room or an airplane as I'm traveling around the country visiting schools and libraries, or I might do it in the comfort of my own living room. But what I can do then is after I sketch this out on my iPad, I just press a button and it gets uploaded to a server that I share with the designer, so he can just download onto his computer all of these sketches for the book. And he'll take my sketches and he'll plug those into the design. And what will happen is they'll make what's called an ARC, which stands for Advanced Reader's Copy. And this is just a paperback edition, nothing is finished, it's filled with sketches, because the publisher needs to get all of the grown-ups excited about the books. They need to get the teachers, the librarians, the booksellers, the people who write for magazines and blogs to get excited about the book so that by the time the book actually comes out, the kids who are going to be the main readers of this book will be excited about it as well. So here's what the finished art looks like for the Platypus book. It's all done by hand, and it's created with pen and ink. So here, I'm sitting at my desk where I do all of my artwork, and right here is my light. And connected to my light is a camera so that you can see the artwork that I'm going to create for you right now. So when I'm drawing my characters, I always start by drawing shapes. Every character is made up of a series of shapes. And not only do I have to always make sure that the character looks like the same character every time I draw them, I have to make sure that their proportions are the same to one another. So Corey O'Malley is always just a little bit shorter than Detective Rick Zango, and I need to make sure that that's consistent. If I ever do create a drawing where O'Malley is taller than Zango, you're going to know something's wrong. So I just draw the shapes. So Rick Zango starts with a shape like that. Corey O'Malley starts with a shape. It's a little bit squatter. And because, when they became detectives instead of officers, if they were officers, they were going to wear uniforms. But now that they're detectives, they want to go on detectives, so they can wear street clothes. And that helped me define the characters as well. So, you see Rick Zango wears a very expensive leather jacket. He has spiky hair. Corey O'Malley, he's had this suit for 20 years. I mean, this suit is older than some of the people who work at Platypus Police Squad. And he's balding. So I draw with this special pencil called No Photo Blue. And the reason why I draw with this blue pencil is that when I go to scan in my artwork into my computer, because after I draw with pencil, I'm going to ink all of this in. When I go to scan in this artwork, I set the scanner to black and white. And the computer will not be able to see this blue line work when I set the scanner to black and white. So I don't have to go and erase all of the pencil marks. That would be a lot of work. But I would also run the risk of wrecking my artwork. The ink could smudge. I could tear up the paper. So next up, I actually don't draw with markers. I draw with ink. So I have a little palette, a little well of ink here. And it comes in a bottle that looks like that. It's called Indie ink. It's a very dark dark black ink. And I draw with a brush. And this, incidentally, is also how I create the artwork for the Lunch Lady books. And when I draw with a brush, it helps me create different line widths. So if I'm light with the line with my pressure, it'll create a thin line. If I press hard, it'll make a thicker line. So I can get a lot of great line variations by using this brush. So when I was designing these characters, I also looked at photos of platypuses. And in fact, I had already drawn the cover when I realized that, you know, some of the anatomy of my characters was a little off. And I know I'm working with these platypuses that stand up on 2 legs and wear clothes. I mean, real platypuses do not do that. I still wanted there to be some resemblance to the actual animal. And I realized I had drawn their hand flippers and feet flippers, not as they actually exist, but as I thought them to. And the same thing with the bill. I had forgotten to draw 2 nostrils on the bill. And that's, of course, important because they do need to breathe. Now, I always start my day with 1 cup of coffee. But sometimes I might be feeling a little tired and I'll have a 2nd cup of coffee. But, you know, if I have that 2nd cup of coffee, I just can't do what I'm doing now, because that 2nd cup of coffee will get me so energized. My hand will not be steady and I won't be able to create this artwork. So I do have to keep that in mind when I'm drinking coffee in the morning. And there we have Detectives Rick Zango and Corey O'Malley, the heroes of Platypus Police Squad. Alright, coming back here to my main camera, and there you are. So, after I create all of the artwork, I then take the art over to my scanner, which is just across the room, and I scan the artwork into Photoshop. So in Photoshop, I have a template that's just set up to the right size of the page, and I make sure that the art is sized correctly, and then everything gets quote-unquote painted in Photoshop. So all of those gray tones are filled in. And I create some light there, so I kind of draw the light that would be hitting on the character's fur. Now all of the final artwork that will exist as computer files will then get sent to to the designer at the publisher, and he'll download it onto his computer, and he'll plug it into a template that is then inserted into what will become the finished book. It has been such a pleasure to hang out with you all and talk with you about my new book, about writing, about illustrating, and I really hope that you all get to writing your own stories, because it doesn't need to be a school project for you to go home and just take out blank pieces of paper and just fill those blank pages with your own ideas and your own stories, and I really hope you do. Again, my name is Jarrett, and it's been such a pleasure having you over my studio this afternoon.